Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Hello, my name is Mel, and today I am here to react to the best books I've read according to Goodreads. I've been seeing this video float around for about 4 months now. I see it here and there. I thought it would be really interesting to react to the highest rated books on Goodreads that I've read and seeing if my personal rating is in accordance to that average rating. I think it's going to be really interesting. I feel like for the most part, I tend to agree with popular ratings. Sometimes I don't, but I think it'll be interesting to at least see, for the most part, for those very, very highly rated ones, what I personally thought. Let me take a sip of water for dramatic effect. Okay, I'm on Goodreads and we're gonna start searching for highest rated books that I have read. This is also probably the slowest website known to man because it's never been updated, so we'll see how long it takes for this to do its job. I also will preface this by saying that I have not logged every single book I've ever read on Goodreads. I did not use Goodreads when I was younger. I did have an account, which I don't know what I had an account for because I wasn't using it, because I think I've had my account since 2013. Never logged a book on there. So everything that I've read pre-booktube is not logged. So the Shatterby series, everything Cassandra Clare essentially, all of the dystopian books from like the 2012 era, none of them were logged on here, none of the Twilight books. So I've read more than the books logged in here, but out of the 310 books I have logged on Goodreads, let's find out. Okay, we're here, average ratings, and I will say I am seeing a lot of sequels, which I think is pretty standard. I think especially for series, it's more normal for the later books in the series to have a higher rating. Typically, the people who move on from book one to later books in the series are people who very much enjoyed it, people who very much love the author, love their work, and for the most part, those books tend to be really, really highly rated. So it doesn't surprise me to, right off the bat, as some honorable mentions here, seeing Jade Legacy, Heartstopper Volume 4, Heartstopper Volume 3, A Court of Mist and Fury, Kingdom of Ash, Heartstopper Volume 2, Lore Olympus Volume 2, Empire of Storms, Queen of Shadows. So I'm not going to talk about the sequels. I am also going to be leaving out graphic novels, and so we're just going to be talking about first installments or standalones. However, for the first book on this list, we've got Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and this is at a 4.72 average rating, which is really, really high. I'm also curious to know what the highest rated book is on Goodreads, and I wholeheartedly agree. I gave this book 5 stars, and there was no doubt in my mind when I first read this book that it was going to be any less than a 5-star. Immediately when I started it, I just knew based on how it was written and the beautiful prose it contains. I think oftentimes when you think about nonfiction, and I think specifically for me, this was one of the first few nonfictions I did read, I think I associate nonfiction with obviously not having good prose, or maybe some of them not being as interesting, and I was very, very surprised at having read this and the writing being, yes, gut-wrenching, but being really, really beautiful in terms of its execution. And so it was, again, it was kind of like a no-brainer, not only because of the topic it's dealing with and how it was addressed and commented on in this book by the author, but also just because of the writing. So this book is a nonfiction, and Chanel Miller was known as a Jane Doe for a very, very long time. She was a victim and survivor of the Stanford sexual assault case, which was plastered all over the news. I had never heard of that just because I'm not from the US. And so going into this book, I had no prior knowledge about this case, about who Chanel Miller was, and what exactly had gone down. And essentially, this book is telling her story in extreme detail, in the way that she remembers it, in the way that other people, other witnesses on the scene have told it before in court, outside of court. And I think it's incredibly impactful, not only because of her story and the experience that she went through, which was just absolutely horrific, but more so, I think what makes this book shine is the commentary around rape culture and how that continuously impacts women out there, and how in this case in particular, it was never really addressed how this was continuously impacting her or her family, but rather how this would impact the aggressor and how he had so much to give to the world and how he had so much potential. And because of all of those reasons, the court was very hesitant to even deal out a sentence that was worthy of the crime he committed. And despite having several witnesses on the scene, and despite having people literally firsthand see what had happened, there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding this case because of the privilege this man had. And so in the way that all of that was addressed, in the way that this book handled the conversation, was incredibly tasteful, but also incredibly raw and emotional and heartbreaking, but also very empowering. And I think at the end of the day, this memoir really is a story about resilience and power and strength, and so made me cry, It made me very emotional. The audiobook is also narrated by Chanel Miller, and so it just adds to an already emotional experience. So I would definitely recommend. Like, this book was just, if you find yourself in the position and the strength and the emotional stability really to read something like this, I would definitely suggest this, because all things considered, it's really, really good. The next book we have here is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and is anybody surprised? I certainly am not, and this is coming at an average rating of 4.64. 392,191 people, and I agree with the super high rating as well. I also gave Way of Kings 5 stars. It really was one of my first few instances dipping my toes into an adult epic fantasy. I think before Way of Kings, really the only adult fantasy I'd read was Priory of the Orange Tree, and so I was pleasantly surprised going into an adult Sanderson book and it being so long, but it being so easy to understand. And I think that is always what I tell people when they talk about Way of Kings, because it's easy to be intimidated by a 1,000-page book and naturally thinking that the stories and themes and everything included in this book is going to be hard to understand. And it really isn't. I think what Sanderson does so well time and time again is having these really ambitious, epic concepts and kind of deconstructing them for the reader in a way that is very, very easy to digest. And I think also with having such a long book, it's very easy for him to give himself the time and space to do certain things and have certain moments in a way that doesn't feel entirely, if at all, overwhelming for the reader, because the book is for the most part pretty slow. Like, Sanderson is known for, I think epic fantasy in general is known for setting up the story, and then in those last, 100, maybe 200, 300 pages, maybe in that last third of the book, for some people, it kicks up and then it becomes super action-packed, but you kind of have to navigate your way to getting to that hill and being able to climb it fully to get to that peak and then go down. And so I think Sanderson really is a master at that, and I think that's why I enjoyed Way of Kings so much. And essentially for Way of Kings, we've got a big cast of characters, which is always really fantastic. I think with epic fantasy, it is kind of expected to have a bigger cast of characters, and we've got an ongoing war here. We have different sides to this war, but in this particular book, we've got 3 key players, but particularly Dalinar. He is the king's brother, and Dalinar has constantly been haunted by this book called The Way of Kings. He doesn't know exactly why. He keeps dreaming about it, why he keeps seeing signs and, these visions about the Way of Kings, but it is up to him to kind of figure out exactly how that is tied to the war, find some answers, and see exactly how that plays into all of these things. We've got Kaladin, who is a bridgesman, and essentially the bridgesmen are people who carry bridges across the chasms, and the chasms is essentially what these armies have to navigate in order to get to the thick of the war. And so they carry these bridges to literally bridge the chasms and let the army plow through. And then on the other hand, we've got Shallan. She is an academic and she is at a completely separate part of this war, but she may just end up finding out a really big piece of information that could be essential towards ending this war, winning this war, all of the above. And so those are essentially the key players, and then there's mystical stuff in here like the shard blades and shard plates, which are artifacts that people can put on and it allows them to have godlike power. It's very interesting. I think, like always, there are a lot of religious elements to Sanderson's novels, but I think it makes the story even more interesting, how that plays into war and into the lives of all of these people, and how all of these characters just add to the story. It enriches it so much, and the writing is beautiful. At number 3, we've got Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. And mind you, I am kind of jumping around because there are a bunch of sequels. It's got an average rating of 4.53. It's got over 455,000 ratings. That's fascinating to me. I do kind of agree with Reminders of Him. I did rate this below the average, so I ended up rating this one 4 stars. But we do follow Kenna in this book, who after a massive accident, a massive tragedy, was sent to jail, and she has just now come out, and she is determined to reconstruct her life in a way that makes possible for her to reconnect and have her daughter in her life. However, there are a lot of obstacles in the way, and there are a lot of explanations to be given out as far as how certain events played out, and there is a romance in here, as I believe any other Colleen Hoover book does, but the romance in here, although not my favorite, I thought it was cute at parts. I think to Colleen Colleen Hoover's detriment, she always ends up making the romance sort of the A-lister of the story when it doesn't need to be. In the story, the romance didn't even have to happen to begin with, and yet it did. And so while it was cute at times, it just takes away from an already interesting and emotionally tolling story, because I think what shines the brightest in this book really is Kenna's resilience and how strong-willed she is and how willing she is to do just about anything to get her daughter back into her life, because she didn't give her up willingly. And so it was very sad at times, but I think that part of the book was my favorite. It was that devotion as a mother without really knowing her daughter to begin with. So it was really beautiful, but the romance part of it, Colleen, come on. Then we've got Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir at a 4.52. Yeah, it's got 312,000 ratings, so I feel like that makes sense for an Andy Weir book. This is a sci-fi, and I also ended up rating this just slightly below average, so the average is 4.5. Ended up giving this also a 4-star. It's really good, and the audiobook was really fantastic, so I would definitely recommend if you're thinking about reading this book. I also think the premise of this book and the way that it's set up is incredible, because we've got Ryland, who wakes up on a spaceship and he doesn't even know why he's there. He doesn't know who he is. He only sees a spaceship and the fact that all of his crewmates are dead, and he needs to figure out things very, very fast because he is the only one holding the answers on how to save planet Earth, and he is the only survivor. So I think the way that the story, the narrative is set up is incredibly interesting. It is exciting. It's easy to understand, even though the concept of it is also, again, like the sci-fi part of it. It's like, do you really understand science, Mel? No, the fuck I don't. And then the companion in this, I was gonna call Rocky an animal companion, but it's an alien, so like it's an alien companion. But Rocky Supremacy, he really was my favorite character in this whole thing. Freaking stole the show. And I love how at the end of it all, it came down to two different species coming together in order to make something work and find a common ground, find an answer, and just solve this whole issue once and for all. So it was super wholesome and it was super interesting. I think the one thing against this book that I found myself stumbling upon as I was reading it, it all resolved very easily. The way that Ryland kept getting his memory back happened very, very fast and very conveniently, and that was something that I didn't really love. I felt like there should have been just a little bit more force, a little bit more tension into him getting his memory back in order for the book just to feel a little bit more tense. Feel it would have given the story a little extra oomph, but other than that, it was really enjoyable, and I liked the reaffirmation of people can be more than one thing, and how Ryland sort of navigated that space of, again, being more than one thing, doing more than one thing, and all of the characters were just really wholesome. I was very much into that. It felt like a cozy sci-fi almost. We've got a writing book in here. I'm not gonna put that, but just know that Save the Cat is up there by Jessica Brody, 4.52. We've got Skyward by Brandon Sanderson next, and this has a 4.5. I actually agree with this. I can't remember if I initially rated this 4 or 4.5, then I bumped it up to a 5. A 4.5 feels right to me. Like, I see it and I go, ah, the people are right. Listen, Skyward, hands down, one of my favorite books of all time. It is so exciting, and I think for people who are intimidated by the idea of a sci-fi novel just because of all of the sciencey concepts and things not being really easy to understand, I think Skyward is a really, really great place to start, because in classic Sanderson fashion, I think he meshes the worlds of fantasy sci-fi so well. And so this is all set in a fictional world, fictional space, and he's got his own made-up concepts, which I think make it easier to understand just because you're not talking like quantum physics or just like something overly, well, it's not overly complicated to everybody, but it's overly complicated to me. and so I think that element makes it easier to understand. We follow Spensa, the main character, and Spensa is constantly haunted by the image of her now dead father. Her father was deemed a coward and a traitor by all of society because of a battle that happened, the Battle of Alta, some years ago, where he fled and he didn't help the army, and she and her family are now suffering the brunt of that decision her father made. And so now she is determined to wipe the slate and start new and make a name for herself and sort of clear her family name from that shame that has been riddling her family for years, even though she also doesn't believe the facts that what people are saying are true. So she enlists into the academy that trains pilots in order to become a great pilot herself, and that is where the story goes. And along the way, she will find answers, but also a lot of questions, a lot of big discoveries, and a lot of things that will just shake the world as they know it, which is always really, really great. And I love how action-packed this is. And again, in classic Sanderson fashion, he doesn't care for fucking nobody. They can be kids, they can be adults, they can be elderly. If it's a fantasy world, if it's a sci-fi, if they're his characters, all goes, everything counts, because he does not spare a single person in here. Everybody goes through it. Everybody, just tragedy all around, sadness all around, tears all around. It was really, really great. You pair this with some really, really good sci-fi music, like a good sci-fi playlist, I think it's going to amplify the overall experience. However, with this one, I think the way that he details everything out makes it really easy to picture in your brain exactly what's happening, which is always really, really great for imagery. Right beneath Skyward, we've got House of Earth and Blood, Crescent City 1 by one Miss Sarah Janet Maas. This has got a 4.48 rating, and it's been rated by over 300,000 people, so kind of adds up with Miss Janet. And this book was kind of like a roller coaster for me. The first time I rated it, I gave it a 4-star, then I gave it a 4.5, then I gave it a 5-star. I feel like that sounds about right to me, but I'm not really sure. As you can tell, I've read it 3 times now, and you know, every time I discover something new, every time it hits the same, and it's a very emotional ride, and I love it just a little bit more every time I reread it. I've always said this, but Miss Janet's Force is not first installment. I pretty much disliked all of her first installments, some more than others, and so this was a pleasant surprise going into this, but then it all went downhill with the sequel because House of Sky and Breath was terrible. But it is set in the world of Crescent City, and we've got one Bryce Quinlan who is half fae, half human, and she has pretty much the perfect life, as some people would deem it. She lives at a very prestigious neighborhood, at a really stunning apartment. She's got some really fantastic friends. She is a party girl. She is a socialite, like she is seen everywhere. And then one day she is approached and she is told that she may be the only person able to solve one particular murder mystery, one particular crime, except that she won't do it by herself because Lord forbid she goes on this quest by herself. And so she is assigned one Hunt Athalar, who is a fallen angel, in order to work together and solve this crime for the good of Valbara, which is the city, well, Crescent City, Valbara, Pangera, all of the above. It's all kind of the same place. The territories in Crescent City are fucking confusing. And so this is much more aligned with the urban fantasy genre. It's very much high-tech, much more modern than any other of Janet's books. I really enjoyed this. I think the emotional aspect of this is very much present. I think the pacing for some people will be off. I personally have a good time, and I think anytime I think about this book, I think about it almost in parts, where the first third of the book is very much about the main conflict happening and it's sort of setting up the story, and then the very middle of the book is a lot of character development, and then you've got the very last third of the book, which is essentially plot and plot twists and action-packed goodness, which again, we all know that Miss Janet tends to do the most exciting thing for books in the last 100 pages, regardless of the length of the book, so I think it's pretty much in brand with her, but I like Crescent City. I don't like Hunt Athalar, but I like Crescent City. Oh gods. I knew this day was coming. Oh, we've got The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this has got a 4.47 rating on Goodreads. How many people have read this? Let's see how many people I'll have disliking my video. Thank you very much. 1.4 million. I swear to God, what did I just sign up to? Because 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, against contrary belief, is not that good of a book. Now, let me tell you in this small dissertation. Essentially, in this book, we follow Evelyn Hugo, who is a super famous actress. She is what a lot of people would consider a bombshell, and now, after many, many years of a very long career, she gives the exclusive to Monique Grant, a journalist, to write out a piece on Evelyn Hugo, which has never essentially been done before, or very, very rarely. And so people are shocked as to why she is choosing this person, why her, why now. And Evelyn Hugo will recount the tale of her life in the different stages of her career, in all of her different husbands, and a lot of her life is very sort of episodic in the way that she tells it. She relates a lot of her stages in life to obviously her husbands because they are very intrinsically tied to certain periods, and so that is what the story is about. I think Evelyn Hugo Hugo is an interesting case of a book that has two very important representations in it, right? You've got the bisexual rep in this, and then you've got the POC Latina rep in Evelyn Hugo. Now, a lot of people won't agree with me when I say this, but it's just the way that I look at this book, especially when I read it, and all of the things that rubbed me the wrong way. Because it seems that a lot of people end up liking Evelyn Hugo for one of the reps whilst completely ignoring how absolutely terrible the other rep is, which is the Latina POC rep in this. Not only is Evelyn Hugo whitewashed by the public who reads this book, might I add, because a lot of people will say that Evelyn was light-skinned and that she was white passing. She is not. She is more than enough times described as a brown woman who's got very, very blonde, almost white hair that, in contrast to her skin, according to Taylor Jenkins Reid, is very, very unnatural looking. And it only works on Evelyn because Evelyn is Evelyn and she is hot and she is a bombshell, and only Evelyn could make this work. And so it seemed in my experience reading this book that Taylor Jenkins Reid ends up doing to Evelyn Hugo the same exact thing that people in the book tend to do to Evelyn Hugo, which is completely erasing her identity. And I think there were several different routes this book could have taken, because while a lot of people beg Evelyn and give Evelyn the option to erase parts of herself in order to be successful, I don't think that warranted the author also taking away parts of Evelyn that should have been a key to her character. Especially because, and this is just me and the way that I look at it, if Evelyn Hugo was giving up so many parts of herself in this book for her career to take off and for her to have the life that she wanted, I think there should have at least been some internal dialogue sort of contemplating these ideas and these constructs and all of these things that she's given up. Not necessarily in an air of regret, but just in contemplation, because it seems that Taylor Jenkins Reid only brings it up when it's convenient and it's very out of place, and I definitely did not like that. The ending of this book also rubbed me the completely wrong way, and it just seems that for a book that is set to have so many amazing representations on all different ends, it fails and it fails and it continues to fail. And if you've read the ending of this book, then you know exactly what I'm referring to. Miss Evelyn tries to use parts of her identity as a Latina woman, as a bi woman, in order to get out of a very nasty situation that I just absolutely hated how that was handled, how that was addressed, and how that was navigated in the book. It was just not good. I was genuinely horrified. By the time I finished the book, I was like, did that just happen? Did I just read what I read? And so in terms of the rep, I definitely did not vibe with Evelyn. I think the book in and out of itself had some really beautiful parts to it. Taylor Jenkins Reid is a competent author. I don't think anybody can say Taylor Jenkins Reid cannot write, but I think when you're navigating particular conversations and when you're threading such a fine line, there is such a thing as going wrong very, very fast. And this book went wrong very, very fast for me. It is what it is, and for the 1.4 million people who loved this book, don't come for me. And also, y'all do not want me to get into how toxic her relationship with Celia was. Y'all do not want me to go there, but if you want to see past Mel going into that, you can go watch that vlog. I don't go into it with spoilers, but I go into it enough for it to make more sense probably than what I'm saying now. Next, we've got Educated by Tara Westover, 1.2 million ratings, and it's got a 4.47. I didn't rate this book, and it didn't feel right to me to rate it just because I know if I would have rated this, I probably would have given it less than a 4-star, only because it didn't wow me. And in my eyes, if it's not going to be a 5-star, it feels like, I feel like there's something inherently wrong with rating somebody else's life experiences. I know there's been some also speculation about inconsistencies in Tara Westover's story and how people have spoken out against this book and things not necessarily being as true as she paints them out to be. I do know that happened at some point in time. However, it didn't feel right to rate it. And so that was kind of my ending point with this book, where I didn't end up rating it for that reason. However, it is a memoir, it is an nonfiction, and we follow the story of Tara Westover, who was born to a survivalist family, and they literally lived out on the mountains, very secluded. Her and her siblings were never allowed to go to school, never allowed to work, never allowed to really do anything outside of their family and outside of what their father mandated in the household. And she never stepped foot in a classroom up until she was 17 years old. And here's the thing, I read this book on audio, or I listened to it, whatever technicality you want to use. I read it anyway. I wasn't wowed wowed by the prose. And so I found that the prose was very lackluster in this. So it didn't blow me away, and I was expecting some really beautiful writing. The patriarchy was very much reigning her household. They didn't really get to make any calls. Even her mom was pretty much restrained by what her father wanted her mom to do. And so in that regard, it was very horrific. What him and her brother ended up doing to her, it was just a very abusive relationship overall. And a big part of this book is really how much the people that you love and love you back, how much power they do have over you at times, and how much love is used as a shield to make a lot of terrible decisions for people. And I think that's something that shines really bright with this book, like obviously not in like a positive light, but it is a common thread in this book of just because people they say they love you doesn't mean that they do. And so there are a lot of things in here about parenthood and parents being neglectful towards their kids and sort of shielding themselves with the idea of love, and children feeling obligated to love their parents back or loving family members back without really understanding what love really entails. And so it was intriguing, it was fascinating, but it just didn't really wow me. The N-word was also dropped several times in this book, and I just remember this moment so vividly, being on the treadmill, but did she have to repeat it? And the next one is Punching the Air by Ibi Zoboi and Yusef Salaam, and this has got a 4.45, and it was only rated by 17,000 people. Like, that's wild to me. I think when we compare adult books versus YA, I think the comparison in numbered ratings is really astronomical. That's really wild. I rated this 5 stars. It was really, really good. I think the audiobook for this is perfect. It's short, it's sweet, but it's just full of emotion. It is written in verse as well. And in this book, we follow Amal, who has always been an artist, except that one day there is an altercation in school, and people just pass it off as like, oh, you know, this boys being boys, and like, it's fine. However, in this book, it is highlighted that boys being boys and they'll just be fine, it's fine, they're just play fighting, or they'll get over it, is really only a concept that oftentimes applies to white people and white boys in particular in this case, and how he faces the backlash of boys being boys because he is black. And so at the ripe age of 16, he finds his life upended, he ends up in prison, and in prison he kind of loses all passion for art, and he finds that obviously his life has massively changed in a way that he never really expected it. He had different plans for his future, he had a different outlook on how his life was going to play out, and now everything seems to have been turned upside down in a matter of seconds, and he needs to reconnect with his passion for art, and he needs to speak loud and use his voice and really make sure that what he believes in and that the truth of the story is heard. Though I don't think any of us are surprised that I cry, but that audiobook really made me bawl my eyes out. So I think if you're in the business for a really, really stunning verse novel that is quick to read, the audiobook is good, and that will really have that emotional societal commentary impact, I would say go for Punching the Air. Next up, we've got The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This has an average 4.45 rating, and I rated this a little bit below average, rated this 4 stars, but this was such an enjoyable time. I think the found family aspect in this was just so stunningly done. It was very comedic in a way that I think balanced out the main character's sort of lonely, sad tone. And so the book is very self-aware in that sense, where I think TJ Klune must have felt at times that there needed to be a balance for both things, because if not, then the book would have just ended being really, really sad. So we follow Linus Baker as he is assigned for a new case. He is a caseworker, and he is now being sent out to this very peculiar house filled with very peculiar kids, where he is determined to find out exactly what is going on with these 6 magical individuals that potentially bring forth the end of the world. Particularly one of them is very likely to bring forth the end of the world. However, we've got one keeper for these kids, and that is Arthur, who will literally keep all of the secrets till the day he dies, and I love him for it. It was really, really good. It was very wholesome. Again, I find that the book has a tone of loneliness, like big time, because of Linus. He is very by the book. He leads a very lonely life. He lives by himself. I think he has a cat, right? No, he has a cat or an animal of some sort, and he doesn't date. He never really does anything outside of work, and he really strives to be the best caseworker that there is, and that has really kind of worked against him because he's really made his whole life his job, and he doesn't really have anything outside of that. And so I love that the ultimate lesson for him in this book was there is so much beauty in life if you only look outside the scope of work, and there are many things that are beautiful and that can fill your life up with love and happiness and all of the good things and all of the fluff, and I just absolutely loved it. And that's it, friends. Those are all of the best books I've read according to Goodreads. Let me know down in the comments, what are some books that according to Goodreads are the best you've ever read, and do you agree with those? Let me know down in the comments. I think it'll be interesting to see you guys' answer to the question as well, just because I feel for booktube, unless it's like outside of scope of fantasy, I feel for a lot of us the answers will pretty much be somewhere around the same realm. Do you agree that these right here are the best books? Like, have you read them? What do you think? Let me know also down in the comments. And if you've watched till the end of this video, let's leave a, you know, like the list with the pencil, leave that emoji down below if you've made it to the very end. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. I am constantly uploading videos that I'm sure you do not want to miss. And if you want more content from yours truly, I do have a Patreon. I post exclusive videos, live shows, there's a Discord server, there are 2 book clubs, readathons, all the fun stuff is happening over there as well. So that is always linked down below alongside all of my social medias in case you want to find me anywhere else. And yes, I love you guys so much, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye!